Please, close your eyes for just a moment and try to remember a very specific sound from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rhythmic, metallic ticking of a heavy wall clock in the quiet hallway of your family apartment. Or maybe it is the distinct, heavy clinking of glass milk bottles swinging in a woven bag against your winter coat. If these simple sounds make your heartbeat just a little bit faster, then you are in exactly the right place. Today, we are going to travel back to the 1970s, to an era that was defined not by what we could buy, but by how we lived. We are going to gently dust off 20 beautifully forgotten things and rituals from everyday Russian life that shaped our generation. These were the simple, tangible objects that carried immense emotional weight, teaching us patience, care, and the incredible value of human connection. We will explore the cozy corners of our retro kitchens and the bustling, snowy streets of our youth. And make sure you stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will share is perhaps the most touching. A quiet winter ritual of handwritten love that I promise will bring a warm, nostalgic tear to your eye. Before we begin opening these precious capsules of memory, let us remember how time itself used to flow back in those days. Time moved at a completely different pace in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It was slower, more deliberate, and entirely free from the frantic rushing that defines our modern world. Today, people are constantly connected by invisible digital threads, yet they often feel utterly isolated. Back then, waiting was not viewed as an inconvenience, it was a fundamental part of the experience. We waited for our favorite song to play on the radio. We waited in long lines while talking to our neighbors, and we waited weeks for a simple letter to arrive in the mail. There is a common myth today that without modern technology, our lives were somehow poorer or less vibrant. But you and I know the absolute truth. Life back then was infinitely richer in pure, genuine emotion. The lack of instant gratification made every single acquisition, every home-cooked meal, and every shared conversation feel deeply valuable. We found profound magic in the mundane, and the everyday objects we surrounded ourselves with were not just things, they were trusted companions in our journey through life. Let us walk back into that warm, reassuring light. And now, let us drift back in time and remember the legendary avoska, the woven string bag that was an absolute necessity in every single household. If you grew up in the 1970s, you definitely remember the feeling of those thin, sturdy threads bundled up tightly in your coat pocket. The avoska took up almost no space at all, waiting patiently for the moment you walked past the grocery store and saw that something good was finally in stock. When you filled it, the true magic began. The bag expanded to hold an impossible amount of goods. Picture it now. The heavy glass bottles of milk and lemonade clinking gently against each other with every step you took. A firm stick of Dr. sausage wrapped in rough grayish paper resting next to a warm loaf of dark rye bread. The heavy weight of the groceries would pull the thin woven handles taut, and they would dig deeply into your fingers, leaving temporary red marks on your skin by the time you reached your front door. Yet no one ever complained about that minor discomfort. Carrying a full string bag through the snowy streets was a sign of a successful day, a small victory that meant your family would have a wonderful, hearty dinner together. It was a completely transparent way of living, where neighbors could see exactly what you were bringing home, often sparking friendly conversations right there on the sidewalk. Let us turn our memories to the dairy aisle, a place of simple, everyday magic, and the heavy glass bottles of milk and kefir that lined the cold metal shelves. There were no plastic jugs or disposable cardboard cartons back then, only row upon row of sturdy glass sealed with those iconic, brightly colored foil caps. Do you remember the color-coded system that every single child knew by heart? A silver foil cap meant regular, fresh milk. A green foil cap was for the slightly sour, refreshing kefir, and the beautifully striped silver and yellow cap promised the rich, creamy taste of baked milk, known as ryazenka. Opening those bottles was a delicate, beloved ritual. You would carefully press your thumb into the center of the soft foil, trying to push it down just enough to drink without tearing the delicate metal completely. Sometimes you would carefully peel the foil off in one piece, smoothing it out perfectly flat on the kitchen table with your fingernail, just for fun. The milk itself tasted incredibly pure, rich, and always cold. And the ritual did not end when the milk was gone. Every single family meticulously washed those empty glass bottles, scrubbing them clean with a special long-handled brush. We would then carefully pack them into our string bags and return them to the dairy store in exchange for a few precious kopecks. A perfect cycle of life that taught us the true value of things. Now, let us move over to the kitchen windowsill, where something truly peculiar, yet entirely familiar, was always waiting for us. I am talking about the legendary tea mushroom, or kombucha, a fascinating living organism that resided in almost every Soviet apartment. It lived in a massive, heavy, 3-liter glass jar, bathed in an amber liquid, and was carefully covered with a folded piece of white medical gauze secured by a simple rubber band. To a child, this thick, layered, gelatinous disc looked like a strange, friendly alien resting quietly in the sunlight. We did not just consume it, we took active care of it. Taking care of the tea mushroom was a dedicated family ritual. We would carefully brew strong, sweet black tea, let it cool down to the perfect room temperature, and gently pour it into the jar to feed our silent kitchen companion. In return for our weekly care, it provided us with the most incredibly refreshing, slightly sour and naturally fizzy fermented drink. Pouring a cold glass of this effervescent liquid on a hot summer afternoon was pure bliss. It quenched your thirst far better than any store-bought lemonade ever could. And because this wonderful mushroom constantly grew and multiplied, peeling off a fresh, slippery layer to share with a neighbor or a relative was a beautiful gesture of community, spreading this strange, delicious tradition from one cozy kitchen to another across the entire vast country. Let us step outside into the blinding sunshine of a hot July afternoon, right onto the melting asphalt of our childhood streets. There, parked on the corner, stood the magnificent yellow kvass barrel, a true oasis of summer joy. You could spot that bright yellow trailer from a mile away, with the vendor usually sitting beside it on a small wooden stool, wearing a crisp white apron. Standing in line for kvass was a social event, a place to hear the local news while clutching a few heavy metallic coins in your sweaty palm. Do you remember the heavy, thick glass mugs? The vendor would press the mug upside down onto a special small metal disc, and a forceful fountain of cold water would wash it instantly, right in front of your eyes. Then came the main event, the loud, squeaky turn of the large metal tap, and the rich, dark brown liquid would pour into the mug, topped with a thick, wonderfully fragrant foam. The taste of that perfectly chilled draft bread cloth was absolutely spectacular, striking the perfect balance between sweet and sour, with a deep aroma of toasted rye bread. You would drink it quickly, feeling the cold liquid wash away the intense summer heat, and hand the heavy wet mug back to the vendor with a satisfied sigh. It was a communal experience of refreshment, a shared moment of simple, unadulterated happiness that belonged to everyone on that street. Now, let us step back inside the apartment and look at the walls, which were adorned with something that defined the very essence of domestic coziness. I am talking, of course, about the thick, heavy wall carpets. Today, some might smile at this design choice, but back in the 1970s and 80s, hanging a large, intricately woven carpet on the wall was a symbol of prosperity, warmth, and comfort. They were usually hung right next to the bed or the sofa, serving a very practical purpose. They protected you from the freezing cold of the concrete walls during the bitter winters, and they perfectly muffled the sounds coming from the neighbors' apartments. But for a child, that wall carpet was a magical canvas of imagination. Do you remember lying in bed at night, surrounded by the quiet darkness, and running your fingers along the slightly rough woolen patterns? The deep reds, the dark browns, and the golden threads wove together to create complex geometric shapes and intricate floral designs. As you stared at those patterns while drifting off to sleep, your mind would invent entire worlds. You could see strange faces, deep enchanted forests and mythical animals hiding within the woven threads. That heavy wall carpet was a silent, comforting guardian of our dreams, a tactile piece of art that made our small, modest rooms feel incredibly safe and wonderfully warm. Let us recall the pure cinematic magic of the home dia projector, the beloved film strip projector. Long before the era of instant streaming and digital screens, this wonderful little metal box was our gateway to fairy tales and distant lands. The ritual always began in the evening, when it was perfectly dark outside. Someone would take a clean white bedsheet and carefully pin it up against a bare wall or drape it over a doorway. The heavy curtains would be drawn shut, and the room would plunge into an exciting darkness. Then the projector was turned on. Do you remember that very specific smell? It was the unique scent of the hot metal casing and the warm, slightly burning dust on the bright internal bulb. You would carefully thread the delicate, curling strip of photographic film into the slot. The defining sound of this ritual was the loud mechanical click of the plastic wheel as you manually advanced the film to the next frame. The entire family would gather around, sitting on the sofa or the carpet. Usually, the mother or the father would read the text printed at the bottom of the colorful glowing pictures, giving different voices to the characters. Sometimes, as we grew older, we proudly took on the role of the reader. It was a slow, deliberate, and incredibly intimate form of storytelling that united the whole family in that warm, glowing beam of light. We must also remember a household chore that was completely monumental in its scale: the great ritual of boiling laundry on the kitchen stove. Before automatic washing machines became a common reality, achieving crisp, perfectly white linen required incredible effort and dedication. The centerpiece of this process was a massive, heavy, galvanized steel pot known as a vivarka, which occupied the two main burners of the gas stove. The entire kitchen would quickly turn into a dense, tropical steam room with the windows fogging up so completely that you could draw pictures on the glass with your finger. Do you remember the strong, clean, almost medicinal smell? It was the unmistakable aroma of coarsely grated brown laundry soap mixed with a dash of bleach, boiling fiercely in the hot water. Our mothers and grandmothers would stand over this bubbling cauldron, using large, sturdy wooden tongs to carefully stir the heavy, wet sheets and pillowcases. It looked like a scene from an ancient alchemy workshop. After the boiling, the heavy, waterlogged linen had to be carried to the bathroom for rinsing, and finally, hung outside on the balcony or in the frozen yard. But oh, the reward for this exhausting labor was magnificent. There is absolutely nothing in the world that compares to the incredible, crisp, frosty freshness of that pure white linen when you brought it back inside after it had dried in the freezing winter air. Let us bring a much sweeter aroma into our memories by recalling the heavy cast iron waffle maker. This was not a delicate electric appliance, but a serious, formidable piece of kitchen equipment that consisted of two heavy metal plates with long handles, designed to be heated directly over the open flame of a gas stove. The anticipation would build as the thick, sweet, vanilla-scented batter was carefully prepared in a deep bowl. When the metal was finally hot enough, you would pour a small ladle of the creamy batter onto the center of the iron. Do you remember the loud, aggressive sizzle it made when you squeezed the heavy handles together? The rich, buttery aroma of baking dough would instantly fill the entire apartment, floating out into the hallway to make the neighbors jealous. But the most crucial and thrilling part of the ritual happened the moment you opened the iron. You had only a few precious seconds to act before the golden, perfectly patterned disc turned hard and brittle. You had to frantically roll the scalding hot waffle into a neat tube, often burning the very tips of your fingers in the glorious process. Later, when the fragile, crispy tubes had cooled down, we would carefully fill them with incredibly thick, sweet, boiled condensed milk. Biting into that crunchy, sweet masterpiece was a taste of pure, unadulterated childhood joy. And what about the great nationwide quest for waste paper? The unforgettable process of collecting maculatura. This was not just a chore, it was a massive, enthusiastic movement that involved every single schoolchild in the country. Our apartments were constantly filled with growing stacks of old, red newspapers, discarded cardboard boxes, and used school notebooks filled with faded blue ink. We saved every single scrap of paper. When the time came, the ritual of binding it all together began. You had to stack the slippery newspapers perfectly straight and tie them up tightly with rough, brown, scratchy twine. It took real skill to make a bundle that would not instantly fall apart when you tried to lift it. Do you remember the heavy, satisfying weight of those bundles as you dragged them down the stairs and all the way to the schoolyard or the local collection center? We competed with our classmates to see who could bring in the most kilograms. But for adults, collecting waste paper had a much more profound motivation. In exchange for turning in 20 kilograms of maculatura, you received a tiny, precious coupon. That sacred piece of paper gave you the incredibly rare right to purchase a highly coveted, beautifully bound book by Alexandre Dumas, Jules Verne, or Maurice Druon. We literally traded our old forgotten news for the timeless magic of classic literature. Let us turn our attention to the constant, comforting voice of the Soviet apartment, the wired radio, fondly known as the radiotochka. It was usually a small, very simple rectangular wooden or plastic box mounted high on the kitchen wall. It plugged directly into a special socket, and in most homes, it was almost never turned completely off. It simply lived with us, murmuring softly in the background of our daily lives. If you grew up in that era, your internal biological clock was permanently synchronized with its broadcasts. At exactly 6 in the morning, you were gently awakened by the majestic, swelling chords of the national anthem, letting you know that a new day had officially begun across the vast empire. Throughout the day, it provided a steady stream of theatrical radio plays, agricultural reports, and classical music concerts. But the most defining sound was the series of rhythmic, high-pitched beeps that played just before the top of the hour, followed by the deep, authoritative voice of the announcer stating the exact Moscow time. That small speaker in the kitchen was our reliable connection to the outside world. Its soft, crackling presence provided a deep sense of security and rhythm, a reassuring, constant heartbeat of the household that told us everything was proceeding exactly as it should. As autumn turned crisp and cold, a very specific, deeply ingrained survival ritual began in every home. The great insulation of the wooden windows. The harsh Russian winter was approaching, and those old double-layered wooden window frames were notoriously drafty. Preparing them for the freezing temperatures was a serious weekend project that involved the entire family. First, we would tear old cotton rags into long, thin strips, or buy big rolls of fluffy white medical cotton wool. We would take knives or flat screwdrivers and meticulously stuff that cotton deep into every single crack and crevice along the wooden frames. Then came the messy, wonderful part. Our mothers would stand at the stove, boiling a thick, sticky paste made simply from flour and water. We would cut long strips of plain white paper, or sometimes use special paper tape. Dip them into the warm, slippery paste and carefully smooth them over the stuffed cracks, sealing the window completely shut until the distant spring. Do you remember the unique, slightly sour smell of that drying flour paste? It was the scent of preparation and safety. Once the windows were completely sealed, leaving only the small fortachka open for fresh air, the howling, icy winds outside could not touch us. The apartment instantly felt wonderfully secure, an impenetrable, cozy fortress against the freezing snowstorms of December. Let us remember the slow, meditative joy of roasting and eating black sunflower seeds, a quintessential pastime of our youth. Buying raw seeds was usually done at a bustling local market, where older women sat behind large burlap sacks, measuring out the dusty black seeds with a small glass jar. Bringing them home initiated a highly aromatic process. You would pour the raw seeds into a heavy, black, cast-iron frying pan, perhaps adding a tiny drop of unrefined sunflower oil and a generous pinch of coarse salt. You had to stand over the hot stove, stirring them constantly with a wooden spatula so they would roast evenly and not burn. The rich, nutty, heavy smell of roasting oil and seeds would billow out of the kitchen window, inviting all your friends to gather outside. The packaging was an art form in itself. You would take yesterday's newspaper and expertly roll it into a tight, cone-shaped cup called a kuliok. Pouring the hot, slightly greasy seeds into that paper cone made it instantly warm to the touch. Then you would go outside, sit on a wooden bench with your friends, and begin the endless process of cracking the shells with your teeth. It was never just about eating. Cracking seeds was the perfect rhythmic companion to long, unhurried conversations, a way to spend hours simply enjoying each other's company in the warm evening air. We absolutely must talk about the serious metallic joy of the metal constructor sets. Long before brightly colored, snap-together plastic blocks dominated the toy aisles, children learned engineering the hard way. These constructor sets came in simple, sturdy cardboard boxes, divided into small compartments filled with flat, perforated metal strips, shiny metal wheels, and an impossibly large collection of tiny silver nuts and bolts. The set always included a miniature flat metal wrench and a small screwdriver that constantly tested your patience and refined your fine motor skills. Do you remember the cold, distinct metallic smell of those pieces when you dumped them onto the living room carpet? Sitting on the floor for hours, you would study the faded, complex diagrams in the paper manual, trying to figure out how to align the holes perfectly. Often you would completely abandon the instructions and let your imagination take over, spending an entire Sunday afternoon building a massive, sturdy construction crane, a strange, beautiful lunar rover, or a heavy truck. The feeling of finally tightening the very last tiny bolt, realizing that the wheels actually turned and the structure held its shape securely, provided an incredible sense of absolute pride. You did not just play with a toy, you built a working machine with your own two hands. Let us bring back the wonderful, slightly dangerous excitement of the heavy glass siphon for carbonated water. This impressive device looked like a piece of complex scientific equipment, sitting proudly on the kitchen table. It was a large, heavy glass bottle, completely encased in a tight, protective sleeve of woven metal mesh, featuring a shiny chrome spout and a long lever at the very top. Making homemade sparkling water was a thrilling ritual that usually involved the father of the family. You would fill the heavy glass bottle with cold, fresh tap water and screw the heavy metal top back on securely. Then came the magic element, the small, heavy silver gas cartridge. You would place it into the special holder and begin to screw it onto the side of the siphon. As it pierced the seal, there was a loud, sudden, aggressive hiss as the pressurized carbon dioxide rushed violently into the water, making it bubble frantically. Do you remember the sheer anticipation of pressing that lever? To make the perfect drink, we would first spoon a generous dollop of thick, homemade raspberry or sour cherry jam into the bottom of a faceted glass. Then we would blast the sparkling water into the glass, stirring vigorously to create the most incredible, delicious, brightly colored, bubbling fruit soda that no modern store-bought drink could ever hope to match. If we are talking about iconic childhood sounds, we must remember the mesmerizing, gentle chime of the Nevayashka, the legendary roly-poly toy. This simple, brilliant creation was often the very first toy a child ever possessed. It was a smooth, brightly colored plastic doll, usually painted a vibrant red and white, featuring a round, friendly face with enormous, wide-open blue eyes. The sheer magic of the Nevayashka was its absolute stubbornness. No matter how hard you pushed it, slapped it, or tried to force it to lie flat on the carpet, a heavy weight, hidden secretly in its perfectly rounded base, would instantly snap it back to an upright position. But it was the sound that truly embedded itself deep into our memories. With every single wobble, it produced a unique, hollow, melodic, metallic chiming sound. It was a gentle, deeply soothing ringing that echoed quietly through the nursery. Even today, if you were to hear that specific rhythmic chiming sound from another room, you would instantly be transported back 50 years in time, feeling the warmth of the rug beneath your knees, and the smooth, hard texture of that resilient red plastic beneath your tiny hands. It was a toy that silently taught us the very first lesson of resilience, showing us that no matter how many times you fall down, you must always stand back up. Let us pause to honor the magnificent rhythmic clatter of grandmother's mechanical sewing machine, usually a heavy, indestructible singer or a reliable podolsk. This was not an appliance that was hidden away in a closet. It was a proud, prominent piece of furniture, often featuring a beautiful polished wooden cabinet and a heavy cast iron frame. The machine itself was a work of art, a black metal body decorated with intricate fading golden floral decals. Using it was a symphony of mechanical precision. You could hear the sharp, rhythmic, hypnotic clatter of the heavy steel needle furiously piercing through the fabric. If it was a manual machine, there was the squeak of the wooden handle turning the large wheel. If it was a treadle machine, you could hear the rhythmic, rocking thud of grandmother's foot pressing down on the heavy iron pedal. Do you remember the incredibly distinct smell of the specialized clear machine oil she carefully applied to the small moving joints to keep it running perfectly? Sitting quietly beside her, watching a simple, flat, lifeless piece of cotton cloth miraculously transform into a beautiful summer dress, a new pair of trousers, or neat curtains right before your very eyes, felt like witnessing true magic. It was the absolute embodiment of self-reliance, patience, and deeply maternal, unconditional love. We cannot journey back to the 1970s without tasting the ultimate frozen perfection of our youth. The legendary plombier ice cream in a simple waffle cup. Forget about the brightly colored, heavily marketed, complicated desserts of today. Our absolute favorite treat was incredibly simple, pure, and flawlessly executed. It was sold from small street kiosks or metal carts by women in thick coats, even in the freezing dead of winter. The ice cream itself had no fancy wrapping, just a single, small, round paper label stuck directly onto the top of the flat, frosty white surface. Do you remember the feeling of holding that pale, slightly soft, ribbed waffle cup in your hand? The plombier was incredibly rich, dense, and tasted intensely of pure cream and natural vanilla. It was so thick and cold that it would almost make your teeth ache when you took the first bite. But every child knew that the greatest reward was waiting at the very bottom. By the time you ate your way down, the thin waffle base had become delightfully soggy, completely saturated with the sweet, melted, creamy goodness of the ice cream. Eating that final, soft, sweet bite from the bottom of the cup was a moment of pure, fleeting ecstasy, a simple luxury that cost only a few kopecks, but delivered absolute, unmatched happiness. Let us awaken our sense of smell to remember the heavy, unforgettable fragrances that completely defined the atmosphere of our childhood homes and the people who raised us. I am talking about the legendary scents of Trojnoi cologne and Krasnaya Moskva perfume. Trojnoi, which translates to triple cologne, was the absolute staple of Soviet masculinity. It came in a large, unpretentious glass bottle, and it possessed a sharp, intense, fiercely alcoholic and slightly citrusy scent. Fathers and grandfathers would splash it generously into their palms and slap it onto their cheeks after a close, dangerous shave with a double-edged safety razor. The sharp smell of Trojnoi would linger in the bathroom and the hallway for hours, a reassuring scent of a freshly groomed man. On the opposite end of the spectrum was the regal, heavy elegance of Krasnaya Moskva, or Red Moscow perfume. This beautiful ribbed glass bottle with a red cap held a deeply complex, incredibly sweet, spicy and fiercely floral aroma. It was a mature, serious fragrance reserved exclusively for mothers and grandmothers. They only wore it on very special occasions, like going out to the theater, attending a New Year's party, or hosting important guests. Catching a lingering whiff of that sweet, heavy perfume in the air meant that something truly special and festive was happening in the house. Let us take a moment to listen to the quietest, most intimate sound of the era. The rapid, precise ticking of a mechanical wristwatch. Long before the invention of digital screens and smartwatches that need to be plugged into a wall, Time was kept by tiny, complex gears and delicate springs. Brands like Pobeda, Raketa, Slava and Poliot were strapped to the wrists of every adult with a slightly worn leather band or a stretchy metal bracelet. Owning one of these watches meant participating in a necessary daily ritual. Every single morning, or just before going to sleep, you had to manually wind the watch. Do you remember the feeling of pinching that tiny groove metal crown between your thumb and forefinger, and the series of tiny, tight clicks as you wound the internal spring until you felt the satisfying firm resistance? It was a moment of connection with time itself. And if you held that heavy metal watch closely against your ear in the complete silence of the night, you could hear its heartbeat. It was a frantic, metallic, incredibly reassuring ticking sound. It was the sound of precision, reliability, and human ingenuity. A small, faithful, mechanical companion that lived perfectly on the warmth of your pulse, keeping the slow, steady rhythm of your life entirely on track. Finally, we come to a ritual that is perhaps the most profoundly missed of all. The beautiful, deeply personal tradition of writing and sending physical New Year's greeting cards. The beloved odkrytki. Weeks before the holiday, the post offices would be flooded with people buying thick stacks of these brightly colored, beautifully illustrated cards. They featured warm, charming images of Father Frost, the Snow Maiden, smiling forest animals, and snowy winter landscapes. But the true magic happened later, sitting at the kitchen table late at night, under the warm glow of the lamp. You would carefully take a pen with blue ink and spend hours writing deeply personal, warm wishes to aunts, uncles, cousins, and old friends scattered across the vast frozen distances of the country. You had to choose your words carefully because space was limited and the sentiment had to be genuine. Do you remember the slightly sweet taste of the glue when you licked the back of the postage stamp to stick it onto the envelope? The absolute peak of this ritual was walking to your apartment mailbox in late December, opening the small metal door and finding it completely overflowing with these tangible, handwritten tokens of love. Holding those cards, recognizing the familiar handwriting of your loved ones, was a feeling of pure, undeniable connection that simply cannot be replicated by any digital message today. As we close this beautiful album of our shared memories, it becomes incredibly clear that we are not simply missing these old vintage objects. We do not long for the inconvenience of boiling laundry or the sharp scent of old cologne itself. What we truly miss is our youth. We miss the slow, deliberate pace of the 1970s, where time felt abundant and our connections with family and neighbors felt incredibly strong and genuine. We miss the feeling of anticipation, the joy of simple rewards, and the comforting rituals that gave our days meaning and structure. These 20 memories are proof that a life lived slowly, with care and deep human connection, is the richest life of all. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face, or perhaps a warm, nostalgic tear to your eye, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us keep these precious stories alive for future generations. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these beautiful forgotten things from your childhood sparked the strongest emotion in your heart today? Or perhaps there is a completely different, unique ritual from your family that I missed. Please write your wonderful personal stories in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your memories are the true history of our generation. Thank you so much for watching, and may your heart always stay warm with the light of the past.